Michelle, why should somebody listen to this podcast today?
I think it's important for us to shed light on the unique world of nonprofits, and you'll get a little bit of a glimpse into the world and some of the challenges and why they deserve the support of creating more impact in the world.
Hi, and welcome to Serenity Now, a place for entrepreneurs to ask questions, learn, get connected, and be inspired. Join us as we talk about all things business and the search for the ever-elusive Serenity Now in both business and personal life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Serenity Now for Entrepreneurs. Today, we're diving into a topic that's close to heart, but sometimes maybe not as well understood as we might think it is. And it's all about not-for-profits. And we have a special guest today, and I'll share with you who she is a little bit later. I hope by the end of this episode, she'll be able to have a better understanding of not-for-profits and a little bit of a story to go with that. First, I'd like to welcome everyone to the podcast today. I'll start with myself. Rita Kim, your co-host, and my other co-host, Candace, welcome.
Hello, Rita.
Hey. And Peggy, welcome.
Good to be here.
Always, right? You don't have a choice though, Peggy, so it's just the way it is. And now to our special guest, which is Michelle Hordal, the founder of Adaptabilities. And it is a not-for-profit, and it's dedicated to creating empowering opportunities for individuals with diverse abilities. Michelle, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Rita, and a pleasure being on your podcast here today. And nice to meet you, Candace and Peggy, as well.
So why don't we start with just a little bit of a background of yourself and, how you kind of came into this thing called a not-for-profit. Maybe share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I am a teacher. I was an adapted phys ed teacher, and I loved what I did. And I worked with students who had special needs that went to a private school, actually, when I first got started. And I saw lots of gaps in the system and decided to do something about it. But I, really call myself a teacher turned social entrepreneur.
Beautiful.
Nice.
I'm going to just start off with getting an understanding. So, not-for-profits, it's a whole different world, or seems like sometimes a whole different world. And, there's challenges that not-for-profits face that may be similar to regular for-profits. And we're going to try to work through some of this. But let's just start with an understanding or a definition of a not-for-profit, and maybe or a different name that you'd like to use for a not-for-profit. So I'll pass that over to you again, Michelle.
I've never actually looked up the definition, what is a not-for-profit, but I know as I've been working in the field for so many years, I know what it's not. And I don't like the word not that's in front of not-for-profit. And I really like to change that around. And I think the stigma around that is people can look at all the things we're not. And I want to look at all the things we're for. And so we're a for impact. That's what we do. And, in the beginning, it was so much about the cause, and I'm passionate about the cause. And I had to really learn, although I feel like I'm an entrepreneur at heart, I don't have an MBA in business. I often didn't have enough courage, or I wasn't smart enough. Like this thing that I grew out of nothing just grew and grew and grew. And there was a huge demand for it. And so I was very compelled to learn about business, and very quickly learned that we have many things that are very similar. It is people first, but profit always. And that sounds like a dirty word in the not-for-profit world. And so if we do not have revenue coming in, then we're not able to do all the wonderful things that we want to do that can create huge, significant impact in our communities.
So with not-for-profits, do they operate differently? I mean, we talk about for-profit businesses and not-for-profit, and you talk about having to make money. So how are you raising the funds? How are you operating?
I was not interested per se in creating a not-for-profit that relied 100% on donations. So there is very much a social entrepreneurial, it's a revenue generating model. And families do receive income for the kind of support that we provide, which is respite. So there is that constant revenue that's coming through. They can go hire themselves, but at the end of the day, parents, they want to be parents. They don't want to be employers. And so that's how I got started, is I was that person that took, I'm dating myself, but took the phone number off the bulletin board. And I found found myself working with an amazing family that were absolutely trailblazers in having their daughter, the very first child mainstreamed into regular education. And so I couldn't have found a better family to be working side by side, learning about everything that it takes to be a strong advocate for people with disabilities. And so they paid me. It was private. They got reimbursed from the government. But then over a few years, I finished my undergraduate in adapted phys ed, and I started working with 3 families and ongoing for the next couple of years until I became a teacher. But then those families wanted to share what I'm doing with them with others. And so it really was about me trying to learn from all the things that I was learning from those families. And they didn't want to have to be an employer paying out all the payroll, the remittance, all of those types of things. And so I ended up just starting really, really small. And I wasn't interested in starting a business. I was just helping out a few families. And so that business piece of it became very evident as a teacher. I had to be a teacher first, but how did I do this business on the side? And I remember reading Tim Ferriss, a work week in 4 hours, right? So it was like, that's it. That's
4-hour work week.
4-hour work week. Yes. So that's really how it all got started. And it was just going to be me supporting 3 families while I'm teaching. And I had about 7 other families I was managing. I could get it all done, but the requests just kept coming in. So there was some revenue coming in. And at that point, like you referenced, Rita, I was a for-profit. It was the margin, not profit. The margin was about $3 an hour. So, 5 years in, the accountant and the lawyer is like, you got us something really good here. If you went nonprofit, what would that look like? Because it was out of the basement of my home. We certainly couldn't afford commercial space. All of those things cost a lot of money. There's many nonprofits that have been around for quite some time, and they rely heavily on government funds. And although the parents receive money from the government, I never look at that as a government grant. We provide a service for every hour. And to me, that's payment for services, and which it really is. It's a fee for service. Lots of people are looking at that. Oh, you get a grant. Well, a grant to me is applying for an application for a grant, and then you're doing, a project related to that. But we work hard back in the day for $14.05 an hour for every hour that we provided respite for those families. And the staff were paid about $10 an hour. So that's where the margin comes in, very small in running that business.
So it sounds like, for people who are listening, it sounds like you were running what we might consider a regular business, just doing fee for service in a business. So when you made a decision to flip over to nonprofit, what motivated that? Why did you do that? Why wouldn't it work in the model you had?
The margins were so low. When you want to attract really good people to be able to do this work, that nonprofit model made sense. We were able to access a whole bunch of funding that we couldn't before. And I would say I got really good at writing grants on the side of my desk that would pull in another team member that could help us grow the business, because I could not handle the amount of phone calls that were coming in. Can you care for my child? And they had about 5 hours a week, but they needed good, reliable people to support their children. Respite is preventing caregiver burnout. It's being able to have time for taking care of yourself, self-care. There could be other children in the family that parents need to also nourish those relationships with spouses, all really important in preserving the relationships within the home when often there's high stress with somebody with a disability. And so I think that for me, that was super important in being able to say, I guess in who I was is I wanted to help these families. And again, I wasn't interested in what my salary was at that time. I was a full-time teacher, so I was doing this on the side. And, after 5 years, it was like, we've got something. So I really thought that, I agreed. I mean, I've got an accountant and a lawyer, and they're very smart people. And they're like, if you did this, I love accountants. I love people in finance. I mean, they know what they're doing. And and again, I didn't have a background in business, and I just wanted to keep making a difference. And I just had no idea how big this thing could get. And so for us, it changed our trajectory, and it allowed us to help more people. Just applying for grants that would allow us to work on a website. Like, there was no money to do those types of things. People would come to us and say, wow, I wished I would have known about you 3 years ago. And it's like, when you hear the stories of families, It's like, you got to do something about it. I mean, that's really what I did. And, this started in 2004 as a not-for-profit, what I like to call for impact. And it wasn't until 2012 that I finally quit teaching, because I just built it up on the side, and it's very unique. There is nothing like adaptabilities, because everything that we created didn't exist. So I wasn't interested in what all the other charities or nonprofits were doing. I was trying to look at what didn't exist, which is very much what businesses do. What's a niche out there? What's a demand? And, we found a really great niche where working parents required supports. And there was nothing for those parents. There was nothing like that at all. So as the teacher, guess the stories I heard? When kids are not in school is when parents were the most stressed. They had no resources to be able to support when children weren't in school, and they were employed. And, having an income come into your home was really, important. So I think to myself, there are more similarities in the social enterprise as in a business. And that's really what I created. It was a social enterprise, revenue generating model.
I'm just going to jump in because as an accountant, I deal with not-for-profits, of course, and also registered charities. And I find out there that a lot of people assume that a not-for-profit is the same as a registered charity, where, of course, the biggest difference is that as a registered charity, you could receive donations. The other difference that people may not be aware of is that as a registered charity, you have to be approved by the federal government to be a registered charity before you can proceed to be a registered charity, whereas the not-for-profit status is a self-declaration. You have to be able to support it because it has to meet the definitions of a not-for-profit, which sounds like you fall squarely into the social welfare kind of pool of not-for-profit. The other key thing is it gives you access to funding.
Yes. Yeah.
Very similar to a registered charity that a for-profit business wouldn't. But I agree, you need to run it like a for-profit business. You still need to be aware of where your money is going, how you're spending it, do all the right things to run the business well. Yeah, I don't think it's as different from a regular business as people think it is. It just has some slightly different rules.
But Candace, doesn't a nonprofit have a limitation on what they can show on the bottom line at the end of the year? Or what do you do if you exceed that?
Yeah. So this is called surplus. If you have a profit, the profit needs to be used for the purposes of the social welfare. And usually this is quite easy if you have any sort of long-term employees, because right away you have a severance cost. If you were to shut that business down tomorrow, you need to have a severance cost. So therefore, having the funds set aside to pay out severance in the case you needed to stop the business is a valid can be. I mean, obviously there's lots of what ifs and buts around it, but funding for the wind down of a business is one of the big allowances for surplus. So it's not that you can't have a profit. There just has to be a purpose that is in line with the social objective of the not-for-profit.
Well, that brings up a really good point, though. If someone's trying to help with supporting a not-for-profit, but if they say this is only for this, or the grant is only for this, that would cause some changes in considerations. So, Michelle, how do you handle stuff like that? Or what would you want to help people understand or teach, bring awareness about on this particular piece? Thanks so much, Candace, for helping us understand the whole accounting side of things. Awesome.
I want to just add to that, because the money that we receive is only to pay the money that we receive fee for service. It's very limiting. It only pays the staff wages. And when we are with the kids, it's all about empowering families and individuals with diverse abilities to grow, succeed, and belong, and being a part of community. That means that we need to jump on a bus. We want to go swimming. We're not all jumping on one bus and going to, 30 people at a time to this one place. Like, we are all going different directions. And we want to be seen as people accepting in the entire community. So like summer camp, for example, we're always out and about doing really incredible things that often these kids don't have the opportunity to do. So you need funds to do that. So that was the switch. It took us 3 years for us to go through that process to get the charitable access. So we were a nonprofit to start with, and 3 years later got that charitable access, and as well the AGLC license so we could have casinos. And that's what funds all the fun. And yes, that part of our business is absolutely fundraised. And that, I think, leads really well into your question, Rita, that they want to pay for the bus ticket, but they don't want to pay for the person that has to buy the bus ticket and arrange how all those things are going. So they would like to fund end projects, but what people need to understand is that there's an administration cost to go into setting up that project, monitoring it, supervising, and then evaluation, which is really key. And that is the quote that I love in here. And this is where, there's a bit of stigma for sure about not-for-profits. And I love Dan Pallotta, and he is just recently come out. He had like the 13-minute TED Talk years ago. You can go and take a look at that, but he's also got a new one on charitable. And it's about an hour documentary, and it is mind-boggling about how we can shift the perspective on nonprofits and what we're all about. But here's what he said. And I think this is a sombering thought, as he says. Ever wonder why charities aren't changing the world the way we had hoped? It's because that's not what we asked them to do. We asked them to keep their overhead low and their salaries low. We asked them to keep their overhead and salaries low. So guess what they did? Which brings me to, I didn't think I could afford an accountant. And that's the great conversation that I was having with Rita. We were $6.8 million in 2020 March, right before COVID hit everybody. And so I was completely stressed. I am trying to manage this. I think I got to do it all. And it took me 10 years to get that teacher salary. And even when I got that teacher salary, it wasn't quite the teacher salary. We weren't quite there yet. How is it that we can go and try to solve some of society's biggest problems without having the people who are talented surrounding ourselves to be able to go and make that impact? We need people like that. And the moment I hired my first controller, I had a wealth of relief. And I didn't think I could afford it because that's the stigma. I held it too. I was told over and over again, you need to be paid less. I gave up my teacher pension. I really love what I'm doing, but I don't think that we need to do this at a cost to be picking up the pieces of that are so important in our world. And of course, there's so many great causes out there and there's so many great advocates, but we lose a lot of people that can do great work. Right now, I think there's going to be a crisis around the corner where really great leaders in the nonprofit world are leaving. And they are retiring. And what do we do with those above? We all know that the younger generation is teaching us something about balance and about what we're worth. So I think this is a really critical place where we need to value the people who show up each and every day, committed to a fabulous cause, but we need to retain them. And to do that, I need to pay them well. I need to make sure that they've got a benefits plan. And that was unheard of. We've got a really good benefits plan. We've got personal days. I don't even want to know why or where you have to go to, but we have 6 as a basis. And whether it's illness or you need to take your child to school on the first day, it's just, these are yours. That's important that we give them some of that flexibility. And there is more days for those that are in management positions. So really important.
Michelle, let's answer that question you asked about how do we get there? How do we get to the point where nonprofits are enabled to hire the right people, to retain the right people, to pay them the way they need to be paid, and impact the way you want to impact the world?
I think it starts with education, and I'm going to say that's what Dan Pallotta would say. And so I share that Dan Pallotta, any new board member that comes in, they need to know about it. They need to know about those concepts, but then through the general public. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to shed some light on the topic. If people could just see what people in the nonprofit world are experiencing. I don't know how I made it through when I say to the other side, but there were times that I wanted to quit. I mean, I know people in business want to do that as well, but I have never felt more overwhelmed in my life. Because this thing that I created just kept growing and growing and growing. And if you go back, you can look at the CRA and look at the stats, and it's 20 to 30% year over year over year. And when you're billing $14.05 to $32 an hour, now we're at 35 is our top. That's hundreds of thousands of hours that we're providing. But you have a workforce who's overwhelmed. Burnout is rampant. Employees are disengaged. They're frustrated. And people are leaving. We can train them. And I can't tell you how many people have gone to, and this is just the way it is, gone to government or bigger organizations that have better everything. we hired a compensation consultant and we said we want to be at the 75th percentile. And why? Because we want not to be in line with everybody, but we want to be higher than everybody. So it takes some thinking out of the box. But it starts with people outside really understanding if we can create these results and the stories and the impact, let us have the opportunity to have some of those overhead costs, but without so much explanation. And I know everybody wants to know, where are my dollars going to? Where are my dollars going to? It's out there. Everybody can see. But yes, we're going to pay our people well. So if you don't want to give to us because of that, that's okay.
Is that an obstacle now? Is that you're viewed as not spending the money wisely when you pay people well?
We've had a great, track record. I've had very little people coming up and questioning that. There's been a few people, we're a charity that gives bonuses at the end of the year. And now I'm going to change that. It's not a bonus, okay? Because you're not allowed to do that, but you can give top-ups because we want to follow all the rules. When somebody doesn't show up for work because they're sick or they have no more benefits and they just don't show up, somebody else is taking over and doing something that somebody was supposed to do but didn't. And so we run on the Entrepreneurial Operating System by Gino Wickman, the book called Traction, and we run very tight execution. We've got our annuals, our quarterlies. Everybody's got rocks. Yes. Okay.
Candace holds up the book.
For me, this is what I needed, my 2-page business plan, but I want to reward people. Like, why wouldn't we want to reward people? I think the government tells us we can spend about $50 within our contract on an employee for benefits, like benefits as in adaptabilities could buy them something. And that to me just isn't good enough. How am I going to keep somebody for $50? So we're a charity and we'll get the money from somewhere else. But it's all part of the process of being able to change people's perspectives. And I think people in our world are looking for satisfaction. And we've had to do a lot of things in the last 4 years. It's been 100%. How do we take care of our people?
Compensation comes in more formats than just a paycheck, unfortunately.
Yes. My husband is a counselor at a high school, and I love what the student council does. And I am not ashamed to be able to copy a great idea. But he comes home with this, you're all that in a bag of chips. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So at our next Renew, which is our yearly training, we come together, we celebrate. And I'm like, we're giving out bags of chips. And we've done those little treats, and they get delivered by me or people in the leadership team, because we're just popping by, at Easter to say thank you. And there's great little gifts. And, in the summer, I might even have one here. I do. I kind of didn't think about this, but it's like, this is so cool. And I know this is a podcast, but, maybe one day it won't be. But it'll be, on YouTube. You really shine like the sun. Thanks for all you do. But these are the little things that we have been working really hard to be able to say thank you, because there is no adaptabilities. There's no supporting our families without our team. It's so, so important.
I think that there's been a stigma for a long time. And I'm going to say I've been a bit a part of this as well, is, oh, it's a not-for-profit. Oh, it's a charity. And, I give my money, but where does it go? And instead of going the extra step and doing a little more due diligence, I just reflect on some past stuff that I supported and donated to and saw them do not so good things with it. So then that's stuck in the back of your head. I think that nowadays, with the amount of transparency, the information age that we're in, where we can see things so much differently. And again, this is what this podcast we're trying to do, is educate or maybe help relearn maybe how things actually work, and this is also where we get vulnerable about learning and our own biases. But also, Michelle, it's great to hear some of the impactful things that you've done, but also all the challenges you've gone through just so that you could keep helping others.
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to, just talking about transparency, Mike House, who to me is just a fierce leader in this world of, not-for-profit, and did wonderful things with the Stollery. And, he came to our breakfast. And one of the things that he said is something that we did that he'd never done before. And this comes with transparency. We want to raise money. And last year, this is what we raised. but this is what we did with it. And we showed them what we did with it. And so people have salaries that are a part of that because somebody had to create that wonderful space that is, when you go to tour Millbourne Center, it is amazing. But it just didn't take money to buy the tables and the chairs and the kitchen. Like, someone had to know more than me that we're going to go in there and execute. I have the vision, and I have to find people who can go and make that happen. And he's like, that'll be something that he does all the time. Because usually you're talking about, what you're looking for the money for this year, but you don't go back and report to everybody what it is. It wasn't a common thing. So I think we've got a great team that makes sure that we show and demonstrate what that money goes to, along with telling really great stories about the impact. So
yeah, I'm sure you've got some amazing stories there. And I think we could probably talk for at least another hour or so, Michelle, because just starting to learn and dive into this and just learning about your incredible background and experience is amazing. So I'm going to go to that place where we do something called a quick fire. And that's where we kind of go around the room and share a little bit, maybe of what resonated, maybe something that was an aha moment, or maybe one final question that we wanted to ask you, or maybe you get a chance to say one final thing that you wanted to make sure you shared. And sometimes we forget about it in the moment and the beautiful moment of the podcast. So I'm going to turn it over, and maybe I'll start with Peggy.
I'm going to go back to the impetus for going to not-for-profit. I think that is something that people can consider if you fit all the criteria to going to not-for-profit in your business model would open up doors to funding that you might not otherwise have. That was a really important point, I think, in your decision to go from for-profit business to a non-profit business.
I'm going to segue off of that and ask you, because when you were explaining to us how your business was set up, it's clear to me now that you started as a not-for-profit, but now you're a registered charity. So that transition from not-for-profit to charity, was it difficult? You mentioned it took about 2 years. Like, was there a lot of work involved in doing that? Or
there's a big application process. I think it's harder now because there's so many applications going in.
Yeah.
But back in 2004, it really was making sure that you answered all the questions. I had a great lawyer that was supporting me. We had to change a little bit about the structure of the business because it was a Companies Act, not for profit.
Yeah.
And then we had to change the Articles of Association, also known as bylaws, in order to change, the dissolution.
Charity,
all had to be done that because when you go charity, it wasn't that difficult. It was so long ago. I don't remember it being super difficult, but it was very much in depth, a lot of questions, and it wasn't something that I got done in a day.
It had very precise requirements, but it was clear. And once you got the requirements, then it was, Thank you.
I have one last question. There was so much stuff that you said, but one of the big things I really liked was the idea of the not in front of a business. I don't like the not either. I don't like that. It's negative. And I really like the way you said for impact. So maybe I'm going to adopt that and say for impact now for businesses that are designated not for profit. But my question is now, where do you go from here?
We definitely have a 5 to 10 year plan with adaptability. So we're in the works for that. We know that these are gaps in the system. We've just been really supporting Edmonton and area. We've gone into Leduc, but there's lots of needs of children who are falling through the cracks in this work-related respite care, then across Alberta. And I am now stepping out of my comfort zone, going on a podcast, sharing more, really excited about celebrating our 20 years. And we're young. And so, the next thing that I'd really like to do is help support other charities, women entrepreneurs. We are so passionate about our cause. And like myself, I needed a lot of support around having confidence in myself, but a simple structure, that traction for me gave me the confidence to be able to go and grow this business and be able to create more impact. So it just fills my cup when I can share and help another leader and imagine, them being able to grow. Like really, I'm interested in growth opportunities, nonprofits, for impact organizations, women entrepreneurs that want to grow. And I think I can give back in that way.
I think you can too. So I guess in summary, just reminding everyone of a little bit of some of the stuff that we might have learned today is not-for-profits are here to make an impact. And they need the same kind of resources and support as other businesses. and working together to change the way maybe how we think or how we look at it, or maybe some old biases that we've had, to learn a little bit more. I mean, this is great. So we can actually, I hope, make a continued difference in the lives of so many individuals, just like Michelle and the rest of her team has done. So I wanted to say thank you to everyone. Thank you, Michelle, for being here. Thanks, Candice, and thank you, Peggy. And thank you to our listeners for joining us on another episode. And we hope that perhaps if you like this, maybe you can share this with another entrepreneur for impact or for profit. And we hope that this might bring some serenity now. Thank you again, everyone.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and picked up some good tips and best practices that would benefit your entrepreneurial journey. Remember, none of the content in this podcast should be relied upon as standard legal or business advice. Always consult a professional for your specific business. You may know someone who could benefit from this podcast. Please share it with your business community, and perhaps it can give an entrepreneur you know some serenity now.